Hi and welcome to Leitrim Daily. My name is Breifne Earley and you are listening to Kiss My Arts. It's episode 124 of the show. And today we have one of Leitrim's up-and-coming new writers. Kevin McManus joins me today to talk about his new book, The Dark Path, the first in a series, I'm going to say. I'm going to put him nail him to the mast here. The first in a series about New York detective John Morrigan. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much. Great to be here, and it's nice to meet you. We were arranging to get together a few times, and it's finally come into being. So delighted to be here to be able to talk to you about my books, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Who would have thought that it would take so long to organise a conversation between someone in Carrigallen and someone in Carrigallen? Especially when you work in Drumshanbo. You are, of course, a teacher in the vocational school in Drumshanbo. Tell us a bit about that side of your life first.
Well, I've been teaching altogether for about 22 years, and I'm teaching in Drumshanbo for 15 years, and lovely school to work in, great staff and nice students, and there's a nice relationship there between staff and students, and I enjoy teaching and teach history and geography, and used to teach a bit of English in the past as well. So it's a good job, and I suppose one advantage to teaching is that the holidays aren't so bad, I suppose you could say, and especially the summer holidays. So it does give you a good bit of free time to write. Now, throughout the school year, though, you're lots of work to do, preparing classes and planning classes and so on. So writing throughout the school year, it can be hard to find time, but you try to squeeze it in where you can.
Yeah, now you started writing maybe a decade ago. From what we had a little chat before we started to record the interview. So you were working on your first book, The Whole of the Moon, from about a decade ago, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it took until 3 years ago for that to actually see the light of day as a book.
That's true, yeah.
Tell us about that process.
I just started writing the book that became The Whole of the Moon, as you say, it's roughly about 10 years ago. And I suppose I was kind of doing bits and pieces with it. Initially, I didn't know where it was kind of going. I kind of wanted to write a book just dealing with growing up in rural Ireland and the experiences of the late 80s, and dealing with the problems that existed back then with emigration, unemployment, and student life and my memories of that time. And I wanted to try and capture that to a certain extent. And when I started writing the novel, it was just meant to be a standard kind of a literary novel, with maybe a little bit of comedy thrown in at times as well. But as it started to move on, it kind of began to bring in various plots and subplots, and I brought in this idea of the plot of a hit and run accident, and it kind of went down the road of more of a crime story. Now, as I said, it took me a long time to write it because I suppose it was due to the fact I didn't have the confidence, to do it. And I was writing at the time, and a lot of it was trial and error, and I'd do a little bit of it during the summer holidays from school, and I'd write maybe here and there, and I'd look at it and I'd say, oh, it's not great, and I'd pack it in. I wouldn't go back to it maybe for 6 months, and I'd look at it again and might write another couple of chapters. And I just thought, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I used to keep tipping away with it over a couple of years. And eventually, I think it was maybe around the Christmas of, I think maybe 2015 or something like that, or maybe 2015, I think it was. I read a book actually which inspired me to finish it, and that was The Spinning Heart. And I read that book and I thought, God, I like the feel of this, and I like the Donal Ryan's book, and I like the way it's written, I like the language, and I could see some similarities between my book and The Whole of the Moon, because they're both kind of very much rural based, and the language is very plain as well. It's very everyday language. So I thought to myself, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to finish this book, The Whole of the Moon. And that Christmas, which I think was the Christmas of 2015, I just said, look, I'm going to finish it. So, towards that time, I sat down, and from there till about Easter of, I think it was 2016, I just finished it. I just kept at it for about 4 months, and I just finished it off. And I thought to myself, look, I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know if it's any good or not, but I'm going to finish it. And I actually showed it to my wife, Mary, and I says, what do you think it is? She had no idea I was writing a book.
Oh, really?
No idea whatsoever. Nobody knew, because I used to be,
that little confidence.
I just didn't tell her. And I'd be, at a little study at home where I'd be preparing classes and things like that. And, after doing my homework or getting stuff ready for school, I might spend a half an hour tipping away writing at this. And I showed it to her then around April, May of that year. And I said, what do you think of this? And she says, what, you've wrote a book? I said, yeah. I said, look, it could be rubbish. What do you think of it? And she read it and she said, God, it's really good. And she was really impressed with it. And she says, why don't you send it off to a publisher? So I said, well, look, I'll give it a shot. I hadn't much confidence to get it published. And I think the first thing I did was actually send it off to an editor. I looked up on the internet for some editor, and I came across an editor in Dublin, and I sent it off to her, and I got her to read through it and maybe help me to shape it up a bit and to polish it up. And she gave me some feedback on how I could improve on it. So I got back to work on it again for another couple of months, and I shaped it up and polished it up. And then I sent it off, and eventually got a publishing deal with it. And and the book came out then, and it got a great response. People really loved it. And I think what they loved about it was it's quite a simple book. It's a straightforward book, and perhaps it's a book that people can kind of they can have some association with. It's about rural Ireland, and maybe perhaps people of a certain age, maybe people in their 30s or 40s, might have a nostalgic viewpoint of their youth, and they can read this book and they can kind of get absorbed by it. And a lot of people, really liked it, and that gave me the confidence to go ahead and go ahead another book. And while that book was being published, The Whole of the Moon, the book company asked me, what genre do you want to market it under? And I says, well, there was a kind of romance element to it. And I said, well, I don't think I want to be known as a romance novelist. So I said, there was certainly a crime aspect to it. So they said, let's go for the crime aspect, the crime genre. So they kind of marketed me as a crime writer. So I kind of thought, okay, well, this is the avenue I'm going in. And I kind of took off from there.
So after The Whole of the Moon, you wrote Under the Red Winter Sky, which is a sequel to that?
It was a sequel to it. Because when I wrote The Whole of the Moon, it kind of finishes in a bit of a cliffhanger, and I won't reveal the ending, but and intentionally I wanted to leave it as a kind of a cliffhanger. I wanted to leave a bit of mystery at the end of it, and that's the way. And then people said to me, you can't leave it like that. We want to know what happens next. And so I kind of thought, no, I'm going to leave it like that. I prefer the ending. I want to leave a bit of mystery to it. And people said, no, we got to find out what happens next. So I said, okay. So I sat down and I wrote the sequel to it. And the sequel was set about, I think it's 30 years later on, and dealing with some of these central characters as they're older, because in The Whole of the Moon, the characters are kind of in their 20s, and in Under the Red Winter Sky, they're kind of in their 50s, early 50s, and it's kind of dealing with them as adults, and then the next generation that came after them, and kind of focused on that as well. And I was trying to tie up the loose ends from the first novel. So people liked it. It went well, and people are even looking now for a third installment in that story. But I don't know where I'm going to go with that yet. Maybe I will at some stage, but who knows?
Is that the nice part of writing a book, when someone comes back and gives you feedback and saying, I loved it when that character did that particular thing? Why do you write the book? Do you write it to get that kind of feedback? Do you write it to get people asking you what happens next?
I think it is, yeah. It's the encouragement you get, when you're sitting at home, and you're sitting at home in Carrigallen, outside Carrigallen. I live in a little place called Killarhark. And, when you're sitting there and you're writing this novel, and writing can be a very solitary thing, and it can be very private to a certain extent. And it's hard to think then that, maybe 6 months, a year later, there's somebody reading that book out in Canada or Australia, and then they're getting back to you and saying, God, I love that book. And that's what kind of gives you the encouragement. Somebody saying, I really got into that book and it really meant something to me and I could really relate to it. And that really what gives you the encouragement, that's what really gives you the drive to go on. We all want to be hugely successful authors, I suppose. But, even if you get some people who are consistently admire your books and praise your work, it gives you the momentum to keep going. And, why do you write? I suppose that you write because perhaps there's things you want to explain and the things you want to examine yourself. And maybe by writing, you're examining your own private thoughts and things you want to get out on paper, I suppose.
Let's talk about the Ray Logue trilogy before we get on to The Dark Path. Who or what is Ray Logue, and where does he come from? Well,
as I go back to The Whole of the Moon, and it was kind of marketed as a crime novel, so I kind of thought, okay, let's try and go down that path. And I kind of thought, well, let's go for, your archetypal detective story. So I decided I'd write an archetypal detective story, which was kind of set in Ireland. And, the idea was that you write about your surroundings, is what you know about. And the Ray Logue books were set in the west of Ireland, in the fictional town of Port Ard, which is in Mayo. I suppose it's kind of loosely based on someplace like Westport, but on a much bigger scale. I suppose it's a mixture between Westport and Sligo or something like that. So I kind of wanted to kind of go that avenue, and I always loved crime films growing up, when I was a kid. And one particular film I always loved was The French Connection, with Gene Hackman playing Popeye Doyle, and I always loved that character. And I kind of based Ray Logue a little bit on that character of Popeye Doyle, that character from the French Connection. So I wanted to kind of base him in an Irish setting. And it worked well, and we started off with Death Rains Down, and again it went out, and it dealt with again, a lot of my books tend to finish on cliffhangers, and which maybe is a good thing or a bad thing. And then I suppose the reason why I do that is because I want to entice readers onto the next book. And then that kind of finished on a cliffhanger, so I was forced to kind of write a sequel on that, and that developed into the second book in the series then, which was New Blood, and it kind of went on to that level, and that progressed then onto the third book in the series, which came out last year, which was 9 Lives, and 9 Lives was, the first 2 Ray Logue books were kind of standard, fast-paced detective novels, whereas the third one in the Ray Logue series, I kind of wanted to slow it down a little bit, and it was focused slightly more psychological and slightly more darker. It dealt with a serial killer. The first 2 novels kind of dealt with fast-paced action, and they kind of dealt with gangsters and things like that. This one was a slower one, 9 Lives, and dealt with more psychological things, and dealt with trying to track a serial killer from Ireland to the USA, and that's. And I so enjoyed writing that, actually. It was a good change from the first 2.
It's interesting that you say it brought you from Ireland to the USA, because that's exactly what the latest book, The Dark Side, or The Dark Path, has done for you. You're now started a whole new character as the lead character of the series. John Morrigan is the name of the New York detective that you've come up with. I have bought the book. I haven't finished it, but I am well into it.
Right.
Absolutely loving it.
Well, I'm glad you do.
And I have to say, it's kept me enthralled. And only that I'm so busy in work, I'd have been up reading it every night, because I got through about 70 or 80 pages of it in the first sitting, and it was just absolutely fantastic. And I was like, what happens next? What happens next? The whole way through. Why have you made that decision to leave the west of Ireland, rural Ireland, behind, so to speak, and go to set your next book in America?
Well, I'm not going. I've left it temporarily, at least for the time being. I will go back, to the Ray Logue series eventually. But the reason why I wanted to switch to America is because, and to New York, is because New York and America is such a kind of wide open plain, and you're kind of free to develop storylines. When you're developing storylines based in Ireland, the west of Ireland, you're trying to keep things, what you're writing is fiction, and to a certain extent it's kind of fantasy, but you're trying to base it on real events and real scenarios. So there's only so far you can kind of push it in Ireland to make it realistic, because whereas in New York, it's such a vast open space, and there's so much more openings and avenues for developing storylines, So in some ways, John Morrigan is a very new character. He's a little bit, a bit like your hard-nosed detective again, a bit like a kind of a Ray Logue to a certain extent, but he's kind of a younger man. He's not as kind of downtrodden as Ray Logue, and it was just a new scenario, a new setting. It gave me far more scope, to develop storylines. And this current book now, The Dark Path, featuring John Morrigan, it kind of deals with a detective who's just investigating what appears to be a standard homicide, and where a man in Hell's Kitchen who has been gunned down in what appears to be a burglary or and then it just turns out that as he investigates the story, he finds out that one of the chief witnesses of the crime, that she's killed within the next few days. Now, it's hard to describe the story without giving too much of the plot away. But what he does discover is that as he kind of gets into it, he discovered that there's very much higher forces at play. It's not just a straightforward crime. It wasn't just a straightforward, attack on a pawnbroker shop. That there's far more sinister forces at play. And as he tries to delve into it, he realizes that he's up against some very serious, powerful individuals within New York society who've kind of got their fingers in almost every aspect of society, from politics to the police force. And he's when he's just about to spring the trap, he's kind of thrown, completely sidetracked, and he's kind of realized that to progress further with the investigation, he's going to risk his career and possibly.
I'm going to stop you because you've got to where I am in the book.
Yeah.
And I think you've probably already said too much in terms of the storyline, but it is all of those things. As an independent person, and I do like to read those books in particular. I would have grown up on stuff like Michael Crichton and Michael Connolly and John Grisham as well. Right. So those kind of legal detective stuff. I've always enjoyed the kind of the thrill of that.
Right.
And this is just as good as those, in my opinion. I think
Thanks very much.
It's really, really good.
It's nice to put me in that bracket. I don't think if I had a tenth of the talents of those guys you've mentioned, I'd be extremely happy. But it's an enjoyable arc. It's no great incredible work of literary fiction by no means, but it's a kind of a fast-paced thriller. It's escapism, and there certainly seems to be a market for it, because at the moment, crime fiction is certainly the biggest selling genre in the world. It's kind of outsold horror. Horror used to be the biggest selling genre. Now it's crime fiction, and in this country as well, it seems to be a fast-growing market. Yeah.
Talking about markets, this book has come out, I think it was last month, you launched it. How's it gone? Are you happy with how it's gone?
It's gone well, yeah. It was published by an English company called Bloodhound Books, who are a very, very successful company who specialise in crime fiction. And they've got a great team there who put so much effort into marketing the book, and they use a great deal of social media to do so. And it's gone very, very well. The publication day was back last week, Monday the 28th, and sales have been good. I can't complain. It's been doing very, very well for the first week of sales and consistently at the moment. Now, the big seller tends to be ebooks, Kindles. That's the way things are going. Paperbacks, not so much so. But ebooks, that's the way it's going. There's a certain amount of sales in the paperback side too, format, but it's the ebooks that really are selling. But it seems to be the way to go. I think some people perhaps are more traditional. They prefer to read the paperbacks, but it seems to be maybe in the UK, the USA, ebooks are the big thing. That's what goes.
I think the biggest problem in books nowadays is the distribution of them, because. Particularly, I obviously have the experience of writing a book and trying to distribute a book, and it's an absolute nightmare. Yes. There's so many gatekeepers between the writer and that book getting into the purchaser's hand in their local bookshop. There's probably 7 or 8 different hurdles, and they're fairly substantial hurdles, whether it's getting into an agent or getting to an editor or getting to the publisher, then the publisher getting into the distributor, the wholesaler, giving it to the retailer who then has to get it. And every single one of those people have to open that gate and promote you through that gate to get through. And it's not just as simple as sitting down and writing a book and handing it to somebody and it gets into the books the following week or into the shops the following week, because even that process can take 6 to 18 months from when you've finished the book and handed it to your publisher to actually it being on the shelf and being launched.
That's for sure, yeah.
And then on the other side of that, it could take, there are still... Let's say, for example, someone went in to buy my book the week it came out in a bookshop. There are certain bookshops where that money has still not reached me for that purchase of a book, of a paperback book. But with an ebook, as much as I don't really like Amazon, for the paperback book or the ebook, when someone goes in to buy that today, there's money in your account in probably inside 2-3 weeks.
Sure, yeah.
Which is nice.
Yes. It's fairly quick, yeah. That's the good thing about it. Yeah, distribution is the whole thing, and People often ask me, is your book available? Can you get it in Easton's in Dublin, or can you get it here and there? So at the moment, not so much. So there's not a great avenue for distribution into bookshops. But sometimes I do supply local bookshops. Maybe perhaps sometimes I supply Mulvey's here in Carrick with some books, and other local bookshops. But mainly it's through the ebooks and downloads through Amazon. So look, if people want the book, you just go online and you click it and you get it there within seconds. Or alternatively, you can order the book online through Amazon and you'll probably have it within a week. So it's not too bad from England. But that's the whole thing at the moment. And as you say, from writing the book, you think when you've actually wrote the book that the work is over. It really isn't. So in some regards, the work is only starting, because sometimes, you might have wrote 3 or 4 or 5 drafts of a book, and then you send it off to your publisher, and they might say, well, you've got to tidy up this, and they might suggest ways you can improve it. You've got to go back down to it again. You've got to rewrite parts of it again. You can send it off again, and they might say, well, there's a little bit here you should change, and then you've got to go back to it again. So after you finish what you think is the finished article, you could still have 4 or 5 months trying to finish it up again, and then it goes to the publisher, and they have worked to get it to the marketplace as well. So the whole thing is a long process.
How did it feel when you first held The Whole of the Moon, your first book, in your hands?
Yeah, that was
physical paperback.
Yeah, that was incredible feeling. I think it's, as it goes on, and as I said, I've published 6 books now, that feeling does kind of reduce as you go through it. You get a little bit kind of passé about it perhaps. But the first book, when the first book about The Whole of the Moon, and I remember the parcel arrived at home, and I opened up the parcel, and I had so many books in it, and to actually hold the book in your hand was incredible. That was some feeling. I don't think you'll ever capture that again. It's just the magic of that, actually seeing your first book and holding it in your hand. It's a great feeling. As time goes on, I suppose you get a bit kind of blasé about it to a certain extent, but it's always exciting to see the next book. It's always great to see it too. I think even the first time when I wrote The Whole of the Moon, and when the publishers sent me the cover, they sent me the image of the cover. You find the hair stand up in the back of your neck, and you actually see the cover of the book. It was quite magical, because, as I said, writing the book at the time when you write it, it's such a personal thing. You're sitting at home, you're on your own, you're writing this book, and then it's out there. It's actually a physical thing. It's an incredible feeling to see it.
You mentioned before that everybody wants to be a successful author. What does that mean nowadays? Is it financial? Is it critical? Is it awards? What makes a successful author, in your opinion?
I think what makes you a successful author is that, I suppose, number one, you're happy yourself with what you produce, and you're happy with the materials of a good standard. That's very important, because number one, you've got to be content yourself with it. And secondly, then, if there's people out there and they're giving you positive feedback, that makes it all the worthwhile, because, when you write a book and it goes out there and somebody gets back to you from, the middle of Canada or from Australia, and they've read your book, and it's very hard to believe it. And that's just that. I think that's what makes being an author successful. When people enjoy your work, you mightn't be selling on massive numbers around the world, but if numbers are good enough, and they're fairly solid, and people are happy with your work and they're content with it and giving you praise, then it gives you the push to work on again. So I don't think it's all about financial aspect. Now, if somebody offered me €1 million tomorrow as an advance, I wouldn't turn it down. But no, I think it's all about the contentment of it, that you enjoy it, and other people enjoy it.
You've had feedback from all over the world, but have you had feedback from any of your students in class in Drumshanbo?
I have, yeah. Now, the thing about my books is I wouldn't encourage students under the age perhaps of 18 or perhaps definitely 16 not to read it, because some of the content is a little bit adult. There's a little bit of violence in some of the books because of the fact they're crime novels. Of course, there's going to be a certain amount of violence involved. So I would encourage younger readers to actually read them. Now, but you do from time to time, sometimes you have students that come up to you at the end of class, maybe older students, maybe Leaving Cert students about 17 or 18, and they'll say to the end of the class, I read your book and I really enjoyed it. And that's really good to get, It's great to get that. Or sometimes you might get past students now, maybe students you've taught 2 or 3 years ago, and they'll contact you. They might send you a little message through social media or something like that, and they'll say that they read the book and they really enjoyed it, So that's great, Or other things that's very encouraging sometimes is when somebody starts writing, and they might start writing themselves, or they could be writing short stories, or they could publish a book, and they might say to you, the reason why I started writing is because I read your book. And that's a really great boost, when you hear that, It's nice to think that you can inspire other people to write,
The one that always got me was when someone come up and said, I don't read books. Yours is the first book I ever read because I liked it, or I liked the first page, so I kept reading and I got to the whole thing.
That's right.
That's quite a nice little...
I got that because some people often say to me things like that, God, I don't read many books, but I love reading your books. So I often thought I'd put that in the back of one of my books, for a book for people who don't like reading books. So.
There is a nice cluster of writers in the county. I know Michael Harding probably gets most of the column inches, but Jane Gilheeney-Barry in Ballinamore, Nicola Kearns in Ballinamore and Fina, yourself, Conor Braden, Manor Hamilton just launched his first book, and there's many, many more as well. What is it about this part of the world that inspires so many people to take the pen?
A good question, why it is. I suppose we all inspire each other. There's so many great people from the county. Of course, you've got Seamus Rourke there in Carrigallen, and he's a great artist, a great poet, a great writer. I have a cousin of mine there as well. She's called Christina Nixon. She's published a number of books too in Carrigallen. I suppose we inspire each other. What is it about Leitrim that makes people write? I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the remoteness of the area. Maybe it's the quietness. Maybe it makes you very introspective more so because there isn't so much hustle and bustle around, and the quietness kind of makes you withdraw into yourself more so and to write about it. But certainly at the moment there's a great creative output in the county. You mentioned Jane Gilheeney-Barry and Nicola Kearns, and there's other people too. There's a couple of writers around Carrigallen too. There's Aisling Doonan, she's writing short stories too, and there's a great writers group there called the Scribbles Book Club. There certainly is, and it's great to see it. I can't put my finger on it why it is, but it certainly is quite a creative area, I
suppose even back to the days of John McGahern, we've always had a love of the
I suppose maybe it's the landscape, I love John McGahern's work, and I love the way John McGahern kind of captured the landscape and how it inspired the work. And that's what I tried to do a little bit in some of my earlier books in The Whole of the Moon, to kind of really give a feel for the landscape and how the landscape inspires the people. I've kind of moved away from that a little bit with the kind of crime novels, but there's something I'd love to go back to. Something what I would like to go back to maybe is to kind of more standard literary fiction, when I get time, but sometimes you're kind of on a treadmill all the times in terms of producing the next book, and you've got to produce next crime novel. Sometimes it would be nice just to take a step back sometimes and delve into something a bit more literary and really take your time with it, maybe take a couple of years, and something that kind of explores other aspects of life more than, crime novels.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I have to recommend people get their hands on a copy of The Dark Path. It is the latest novel from Kevin McManus, of course, a native of Carrigallen, and his 6th book overall. The other ones I will list in the description notes here in the on the podcast as you're listening to it. But The Whole of the Moon kicked the ball rolling about 3 or 4 years ago, and you've been just prolific ever since. So
thanks very much.
Congratulations on all your success, and hopefully it continues through the next few months until your next novel, probably which comes out next week, does it?
Oh, well, I have a collection of short stories I'm going to bring out in the spring. So I've had stuff I've been pulling together for years, and again, this is more kind of literary stuff and little bits of poetry, little bits of short stories. So all kind of stuff that kind of doesn't fit into a genre, and I've kind of compiled that into an anthology, and hopefully I'm going to publish that maybe around February in the springtime. And after that, another John Morrigan book, probably next autumn. And we'll take it from there, really.
Will Ray Logue be making another
Ray Logue, hopefully too. It's trying to get time for all these things. I want to go back to Ray Logue as well, maybe next year. Maybe go back to him too if you have time. If you have time, you can do lots of things. But obviously you're working hard, teaching as well, and trying to squeeze everything in. And your job has to come first. Teaching is number one. But whenever you can find time. Hopefully, I'd like to get back to Ray Logue as well.
Kevin McManus, thank you so much for coming in and having a few words with us.
Thanks very much.
This was, of course, Kiss My Arts here on Leitrim Daily. It's episode 124 of the show. I will be back tomorrow with the sports roundup on Leitrim Daily here, looking at the weekend sporting action. I hope you will join me then. Thank you to Kevin McManus for coming in, and don't forget to go out and get your hands on The Dark Path. It's available on Amazon, paperback and as an ebook as well. I'll be back with the sport, as I mentioned. Talk to you then.